The price of trust. Part 1, The Golden Handshake. The October rain pelted against the windows of Meridian Financial Group, transforming Chicago's glittering skyline into a blurry watercolor of lights. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the quiet of the 47th floor after hours. At 42, I had carved out a comfortable niche as one of the firm's senior financial advisors, not quite partner material, but trusted enough to handle our most valuable clients. Still burning the midnight oil, Nathan? Diane from HR paused at my door, her practical blazer already exchanged for a raincoat. The building was emptying out, everyone rushing toward their Friday evening plans. Just wrapping up the Patterson portfolio, I smiled. Their daughter starts college next year, they're nervous about the numbers. Always looking out for everyone else, she said with a knowing look. That's why clients request you specifically. Don't work too late, though. Even superheroes need weekends. After she left, I turned back to my screen, double-checking the retirement projections I'd prepared. I took pride in my thoroughness. In 15 years at Meridian, I'd built a reputation as the advisor who treated modest accounts with the same care as our multi-million-dollar portfolios. My colleagues sometimes teased me about it, Ellis and his middle-class crusade, but I didn't mind. Financial security wasn't just for the wealthy. My phone buzzed with a text from my old college roommate, Marcus. Drinks at Sullivan's at 8? I've got news. I typed back, on my way. Better be good news. The best, came his immediate reply. An hour later, Sullivan's was packed with the usual Friday crowd, a mix of financial district workers and early weekend revelers. Marcus waved from a corner booth, a scotch already waiting for me. You look exactly the same, he grinned, though we'd seen each other just 2 weeks ago. Marcus had the kind of infectious enthusiasm that made every meeting feel like a reunion. Still saving the world one 401k at a time? Someone has to, I laughed, settling in. What's this big news? Marcus's eyes sparkled. I'm being considered for CFO at Telecom Solutions. Marcus. That's incredible. The position would be a massive step up from his current role. We clinked glasses in celebration. It's not final, but the board seems impressed. Speaking of impressive. He leaned forward conspiratorially. Word is your boss Harrington is about to announce something big at Meridian. I raised an eyebrow. Richard hasn't mentioned anything. My sources say it involves a significant restructuring. Potential partnerships. Marcus had connections throughout Chicago's business community, his information was usually reliable. A flash of unease passed through me. That's odd. I'm on the strategy committee. We should be discussing any major changes. Maybe it's still in the preliminary stages, Marcus shrugged, but his expression suggested otherwise. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, his daughter's soccer championship, my recent hiking trip to Colorado. But the comment about Harrington lingered in my mind. Monday morning, I arrived early, determined to speak with Richard before our weekly management meeting. His corner office was already illuminated, unusual for someone who typically strolled in fashionably late. I knocked lightly on his open door. Got a minute? Richard Harrington, 55 and impeccably dressed as always, looked up with surprise. Nathan. Yes, come in. Something about his demeanor seemed off, a slight tension around his eyes, papers hastily shuffled into a drawer. I heard rumors about a potential restructuring, I said, keeping my tone casual. Anything the strategy committee should know about? A flash of something, annoyance. Concern, crossed his face before his practiced smile returned. Just preliminary discussions, nothing concrete. You know how this business works, always exploring options. I'd be the first to bring anything substantial to the committee. I nodded, though the explanation felt hollow. Richard and I had worked together for over a decade. He'd recruited me personally from a larger firm, promising a culture of transparency and collaboration. Over the years, he'd become not just my boss but a mentor of sorts. Of course, I said. Just checking. We've got that situation with the Miller account, thought any restructuring might affect how we proceed. Handle Miller as usual, he said, suddenly interested in his computer screen. Was there anything else? The dismissal was clear. I retreated, more unsettled than before. During the management meeting, I watched Richard closely. He moved through the agenda with his typical efficiency, but twice avoided eye contact when I asked about long-term planning. My unease deepened. That afternoon, I bumped into Kayla Chen, our brilliant young quantitative analyst, in the break room. With her mathematical genius and relentless work ethic, she'd risen quickly through the ranks despite being only 29. You look troubled, she commented, waiting for her tea to steep. Just puzzling over something, I hesitated, then continued. Have you noticed anything unusual about Richard lately? Kayla considered this. He's been having a lot of closed-door meetings with people I don't recognize. And last week, he asked me to compile performance data on our mid-tier accounts, nothing unusual about that except he wanted it without the normal attribution analysis. That is odd, I frowned. Without attribution analysis, it would be impossible to tell which advisors were responsible for which accounts. I assumed it was for the board, she shrugged. Though when I delivered it, there was someone from Carlton Partners in his office. The name hit me like a bucket of cold water. Carlton Partners was a notorious acquisition firm with a reputation for buying financial services companies, stripping them down, and reselling the valuable parts. You're sure it was Carlton? Positive. The guy left his business card on Richard's desk when he went to the bathroom. I have good peripheral vision. She smiled mischievously, then grew serious again. Why? Is something wrong? I'm not sure yet, I said carefully. But keep this between us for now, okay? She nodded, understanding the gravity in my tone. That night, I couldn't sleep. If Richard was negotiating with Carlton, it could mean only one thing: he was selling Meridian. And if he was doing it without the knowledge of the strategy committee or other partners, the situation was even more concerning. The next morning, I made a decision. Richard was in New York for the day, a convenient opportunity to do some discreet investigating. Using my security clearance, I accessed the executive floor after hours and slipped into his office. I wasn't proud of the intrusion, but my loyalty to the firm and our clients outweighed my discomfort. 20 minutes of searching revealed nothing, but as I was about to leave, I noticed the recycling bin contained shredded documents, unusual, as our confidential materials were typically handled by a secure service. On impulse, I collected some fragments. At home, like a character from a spy movie, I painstakingly reconstructed portions of the documents. What emerged confirmed my worst fears: Richard had been negotiating with Carlton for months. The plans involved selling Meridian's assets, with special attention to our high-value client list. Most disturbing was a compensation schedule showing Richard would receive a consulting fee of $5 million following the sale. There was also a list of employees marked for retention or termination. My name was conspicuously absent from either category. Instead, beside it was a note: potential compliance issue, handle separately. I sat back, stunned. Richard wasn't just selling the company, he was setting me up as a potential fall guy if regulators raised questions about the deal's structure. The man I'd trusted for 15 years was planning to sacrifice me, our clients, and the entire firm for his golden parachute. The question now was, what was I going to do about it? Part 2, The Paper Trail. The revelation about Richard's betrayal kept me awake for 2 straight nights. By Thursday morning, I had moved beyond shock into calculated planning mode. As one of my favorite professors used to say, in finance, timing isn't everything, it's the only thing. I needed evidence, allies, and a strategy. Most importantly, I needed to understand exactly how far Richard's scheme had progressed. My first move was to contact Marcus for coffee before work. His connections might provide insight without raising flags at Meridian. Carlton's been on an acquisition spree, Marcus confirmed over espresso at a cafe 3 blocks from my office. They're especially interested in firms with stable client bases they can migrate to their digital platform. Which cuts out advisors like me, I noted grimly. Exactly. Their model eliminates the human touch, it's all algorithms and chatbots. They keep maybe 15% of the original staff, usually just enough client handlers to prevent mass exodus during transition. I sipped my coffee, contemplating. Any idea how close they might be to finalizing a deal with Meridian? Marcus's expression grew serious. My contact at First Chicago says they're reviewing financing options for Carlton. If they're at that stage, you're looking at weeks, not months. Thanks. I owe you one. You owe me several, he smiled. But be careful, Nathan. These types of corporate maneuvers get ugly fast. Back at the office, I maintain my regular routine while beginning a careful documentation process. I needed to build a case that would be irrefutable if, when, I needed to present it. Kayla caught me in the hallway after lunch. Something weird happened, she whispered. Richard asked me to rerun those account analyses, but this time excluding any clients who have formal financial plans. He said it was to streamline the reporting, but that doesn't make sense analytically. I nodded thoughtfully. He's separating relationship-based clients from transaction-based ones. Why would he do that? Because relationship clients are harder to transition to a new platform. They expect personal service. I hesitated, then made a decision. Kayla, I think Richard is planning to sell Meridian to Carlton Partners. Her eyes widened. Without telling anyone? Is that even legal? Legal enough with the right structure and board approval, which he apparently has. But ethical? Not remotely. Especially not the way he's handling it. What are you going to do? I glanced around the busy hallway. I need more information first. Can you help me track his electronic footprint without leaving traces? Kayla's expression shifted from shock to determination. I started as an ethical hacker before finance. Give me a day. True to her word, Kayla delivered by the next afternoon. Using security protocols that were frankly beyond my comprehension, she'd recovered deleted emails and calendar entries from the company server. He's been meeting with Carlton executives since February, she reported as we reviewed the files in a private conference room. And look at this email chain with the board, he's basically painted a picture of Meridian as struggling despite our record profits last quarter. Creating justification for the sale, I murmured, scrolling through the documents. In this presentation, it shows how they'll migrate our top 200 clients to their platform within 30 days of closing. What about the other 1,800 clients? Form letters and a discount offer for their automated service. I felt my anger rising. Some of these people have been with us for decades. They trust us with their retirement security, their children's college funds, and Richard's planning to dump them into an algorithm? It gets worse, Kayla said quietly, pulling up another document. This is the senior team roster post-acquisition. Richard stays on as a senior consultant for 2 years at double his current salary. Most department heads are terminated immediately with minimal packages. I scanned the list, finding confirmation of what I'd suspected. My position would be eliminated, along with most of my team. What bothered me more was a section titled Regulatory Compliance Strategy, which outlined plans to attribute any regulatory issues to previous management decisions, clearly meaning me. He's setting me up, I said, the reality sinking in. If regulators question how certain accounts were managed during transition, I'll be positioned as the responsible party. Kayla's expression hardened. That's beyond unethical. That's potentially criminal. The question is, what can we do about it? Richard has the board's support. By the time this becomes public, it'll be too late. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on us. There's one more thing, Kayla said finally, pulling up a file I hadn't seen. I found this in a hidden folder on Richard's encrypted drive. It's a list of clients whose portfolios were recently restructured, heavily weighted toward proprietary products that generate higher fees but often underperform for clients. I reviewed the list with growing horror. These were significant changes made without proper client consultation, exactly the kind of activity that would attract regulatory attention. When did these changes happen? Over the last 3 months. The transactions were batched and processed during system updates, so they didn't trigger the usual review flags. This was beyond a mere corporate takeover. Richard was deliberately manipulating client accounts to maximize short-term profitability, likely to boost Meridian's valuation before the sale. "We need to take this to the compliance department," I said, my decision crystallizing. Kayla looked uncertain. "What if the compliance head isn't on it? Their name isn't on the termination list." She had a point. We couldn't trust the internal channels if Richard had compromised them. "Then we go external," I said firmly. "But first, I want to confront Richard directly. He at least deserves the chance to explain." "That's risky," Kayla warned. "Once he knows you're onto him, he'll accelerate everything." "Maybe. But I've known the man for 15 years. I have to believe there's some explanation beyond pure greed." I scheduled a meeting with Richard for the following morning, requesting his private conference room rather than his office to avoid potential recording devices. Despite my outward calm, my stomach churned with anxiety. This confrontation would likely end my career at Meridian one way or another. Richard arrived precisely on time, immaculate in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. "Nathan," he nodded pleasantly. "What's so urgent?" "I have the Carlton team coming in at 10. "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," I said, closing the door firmly behind him. "Your meetings with Carlton partners." His expression flickered briefly before settling into practiced neutrality. "I see. And how did this come to your attention? Does it matter?" "What matters is that you're planning to sell Meridian without consulting the strategy committee or being transparent with the team that built this firm." Richard sighed, taking a seat. "Business decisions sometimes require discretion, Nathan. The board authorized these discussions. And the client portfolio restructuring? The plans to terminate most of the staff? The strategy to make me the regulatory scapegoat if things go sideways?" I kept my voice level despite my rising anger. His eyes narrowed. "You've been accessing confidential documents. Documents that reveal you're violating your fiduciary duty to our clients and your ethical obligations to your employees." I placed a folder on the table, copies of the most damning evidence, including manipulation of client accounts to boost valuation metrics. For a moment, Richard simply stared at the folder. Then, surprisingly, he laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You always were righteous to a fault, Nathan. It's why you're still a senior advisor instead of sitting on the executive floor. This industry rewards pragmatism, not principles. Is that how you justify this? Pragmatism?" He leaned forward, his facade of affability vanishing. "Do you know what Carlton is offering? $300 million. That's nearly double our current market valuation. The board would be negligent to refuse. And your personal consulting fee? Is that pragmatism too? Compensation for building this firm into something valuable enough to attract that offer." His tone hardened. "What exactly are you hoping to accomplish here, Nathan? Stop the sale? Preserve your job? The world is changing. Traditional financial advisory is dying. Carlton represents the future. A future where algorithms replace relationships and client interests are secondary to profit margins." Richard stood abruptly. "This discussion is pointless. The deal is proceeding. The board votes next Wednesday. If you want to preserve any chance of a position in the new structure, I suggest you get on board quickly." As he reached for the door, I played my final card. "Before you go, you should know I've documented everything. The account manipulations. The misleading board presentations. The compliance circumvention. I met his gaze steadily. If this sale proceeds as planned, that documentation goes to the SEC, the state attorney's office, and every client on that restructured portfolio list. The color drained from Richard's face. You're threatening me? I'm giving you an opportunity to do the right thing. Delay the board vote. Revisit the client account changes. Structure a transition plan that protects our clients and treats our team fairly. I stood, gathering my materials. You have until Monday to decide. As I walked past him toward the door, Richard grabbed my arm. You have no idea what you're doing. Carlton has attorneys who will bury you in litigation for years. I gently removed his hand. Maybe. But I'd rather fight that battle than live with the knowledge that I stood by while you betrayed everything this firm supposedly stands for. The confrontation left me shaking internally, though I maintained my composure until reaching the privacy of my office. I had just directly challenged one of Chicago's most connected financial executives. The professional repercussions would be significant, regardless of the outcome. My phone buzzed with a text from Kayla. How did it go? Ball's in his court now, I replied. Be careful this weekend. Things might get messy. I spent Saturday organizing my evidence and preparing contingency plans. By Sunday evening, I had compiled a comprehensive file documenting Richard's actions, with copies stored securely with my attorney and in my home safe. Monday morning, I arrived at the office early, unsure what to expect. The answer came almost immediately when security met me in the lobby. Mr. Ellis, we need you to surrender your access card. You've been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Investigation of what? I asked, though I already knew. Unauthorized access of confidential information and threatening a senior executive. The guard looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, sir. I need to escort you out after you collect your personal belongings. On the executive floor, Richard watched from his office doorway as I cleared my desk under supervision. His expression was a mixture of triumph and something else, perhaps regret. As I was being escorted out, my phone vibrated with an email notification. Subject line, Meridian Financial Group Whistleblower Report, Confidential. The battle had officially begun. Part 3, The House of Cards. The next 48 hours unfolded like a financial thriller. By Monday afternoon, my attorney had filed formal whistleblower complaints with the SEC and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. By Tuesday morning, 3 journalists had contacted me seeking comment on allegations of impropriety at Meridian. I maintained silence publicly while working feverishly behind the scenes. Kayla, still inside Meridian, became my eyes and ears, reporting that Richard had called an emergency senior staff meeting where he dismissed the allegations as disgruntled employee fabrications. No one's buying it, she texted. Too many people have noticed the Carlton visitors and Richard's secrecy. The compliance team is in full panic mode. Wednesday, the day of the scheduled board vote, dawned with unexpected developments. As I sat in my attorney's office reviewing strategy, Diane from HR called. I probably shouldn't be doing this, she said, her voice hushed, but I thought you should know. The board meeting has been postponed. There's a special audit team coming in tomorrow. Richard must be furious, I commented. That's putting it mildly. He's been behind closed doors with the Carlton people all morning. The rumor is they're threatening to walk if this isn't resolved quickly. She paused. Nathan, most of us believe you did the right thing. Whatever happens, remember that. Her words provided unexpected comfort. Despite the professional uncertainty, I felt clearer and more purposeful than I had in months. By Wednesday afternoon, the story had leaked to the financial press. The headline in the Chicago Business Journal read, Meridian Financial Sale Halted Amid Whistleblower Claims. The article quoted sources familiar with the situation describing potential regulatory violations. My phone rang constantly, colleagues, clients, even competitors reaching out. I directed all inquiries to my attorney while continuing to gather support. Marcus arranged meetings with 2 board members who had privately expressed concerns about the Carlton deal even before my allegations. "They're willing to listen," Marcus reported after the second meeting. "Especially about the client portfolio manipulations. That's the kind of thing that destroys reputations permanently." Thursday brought the confrontation I'd been anticipating. Richard requested a meeting at a neutral location, the private dining room of an exclusive downtown club. My attorney advised against going alone. "It's likely a settlement discussion," she warned. "He'll try to buy your silence." "Which is why I need to hear him out," I countered. "To understand exactly what we're dealing with." The club's hushed atmosphere and oak-paneled walls created an oddly appropriate setting for our showdown. Richard was already seated when I arrived, nursing what appeared to be a double scotch despite the early hour. "You've created quite a situation," he said as I sat across from him. "The board is spooked. Carlton is threatening to pull their offer. $300 million potentially lost because of your principles." "Not my principles," I corrected. "Federal regulations and fiduciary duty. The things that supposedly govern our industry." He waved dismissively. "Quaint notions in today's market. But let's be practical. What's your endgame here? What do you want?" "I want the client account manipulations reversed. I want transparent communication about any potential sale. And I want guarantees that our team will be treated fairly in any transition." Richard studied me, seeming genuinely perplexed. "That's it? No personal demands? No compensation for your troubles?" The suggestion revealed so much about how fundamentally different our values had become. "This isn't about me, Richard. It's about doing right by the people who trust us with their financial futures." He leaned back, swirling his drink. "The board is meeting again tomorrow. They've asked me to present options for resolving this situation. I could recommend your reinstatement. A seat on the executive committee, perhaps. In exchange for what? Withdrawing your complaints. Signing confidentiality agreements. Allowing a modified version of the Carlton deal to proceed." I considered his offer, recognizing the olive branch for what it was, a last attempt to salvage his position and the lucrative deal he'd worked toward. "I'll need specifics," I said finally. "Written guarantees about client protections, employee transitions, and compliance oversight during any sale process." "I can work with that," Richard nodded, relief evident in his posture. "I'll have drafts prepared for review tomorrow." As I stood to leave, he added, "I underestimated you, Nathan. All these years, I mistook your ethical stance for naivety. I see now it's actually your strength. It shouldn't be remarkable to stand by one's principles, Richard. It should be the baseline." Outside, I called my attorney to report on the meeting. "He's desperate to salvage the deal," I concluded. "But at least he's willing to negotiate terms that protect clients and staff." "Be careful," she cautioned. "Men like Richard rarely concede power without a hidden agenda." Her warning proved prescient. By evening, I received an urgent call from Kayla. "They're deleting files," she reported breathlessly. "IT just implemented an emergency system update that's wiping transaction records from the past 3 months. We're losing evidence." I immediately contacted my attorney, who filed for an emergency preservation order. But the damage was already occurring, digital footprints being systematically erased. "This changes everything," I told my attorney. "Richard has no intention of negotiating in good faith. He's eliminating evidence while stringing me along." "Then we accelerate our timeline," she replied grimly. "I'll contact the SEC Enforcement Division tonight." The next morning, I awoke to breaking news. The FBI had arrived at Meridian's offices with subpoenas for Richard and 2 board members. Simultaneously, the SEC announced a formal investigation into potential securities fraud. My phone exploded with messages, including one from Richard himself. "You've destroyed everything. I hope you're satisfied." I didn't respond. There was no satisfaction in watching a once-respected institution's reputation crumble, only the grim recognition that sometimes systems need to break before they can be rebuilt properly. By mid-morning, Carlton Partners had publicly withdrawn their offer. Meridian's stock, traded privately among employees and select investors, plummeted. The board announced Richard's temporary leave of absence pending investigation results. Then came the call I hadn't expected, from Meridian's board chair, Eleanor Blackwell. "Mr. Ellis, the board would like to meet with you this afternoon. We're in a crisis situation and believe you might have insights that could help us navigate it." 3 hours later, I sat before the assembled board in their 48th floor conference room, aware of the irony of my return under these circumstances. "To be clear," Eleanor began, "the board does not condone unauthorized access to confidential information. However, the substance of what you uncovered cannot be ignored." I nodded, waiting. "We've placed Richard on administrative leave and engaged independent counsel to review the Carlton proposal and all related actions. In the meantime, we face a significant challenge: how to stabilize the firm and reassure clients." The implication hung in the air. They needed my help, specifically, my reputation for integrity, to manage the crisis Richard had created. "What are you proposing?" I asked. "A temporary leadership role," Eleanor replied. "Working with a board committee to audit affected client accounts, communicate transparently with our team, and develop a recovery strategy." It was an unexpected turn, the organization that had escorted me out under guard now asking me to help save it. "I'll consider it on one condition," I said. "Complete transparency moving forward. No more hidden agendas or secret deals." "That's our intention as well," Eleanor assured me. "We've learned a painful lesson about the costs of operating otherwise." As I left the meeting, provisional agreement in place, I encountered Kayla in the hallway. Her eyes were wide with questions. "It's not over," I told her quietly. "But it's moving in the right direction." The next weeks were among the most challenging of my career. Working alongside forensic accountants, we untangled the web of account manipulations, reversed inappropriate transactions, and began the delicate process of communicating with affected clients. Some clients left, understandably shaken by the revelations. Others stayed, appreciating the transparency of our recovery process. The FBI investigation continued, with Richard and several board members facing potential criminal charges for securities violations. Throughout it all, I maintained focus on a single question: what kind of firm do we want Meridian to become? Not just weathering this crisis, but emerging from it with stronger ethical foundations. 6 weeks after the initial confrontation, the board offered me a permanent position as Chief Ethics Officer, with oversight of compliance and client relations. It wasn't a role I had ever envisioned for myself, but one that now seemed fitting. "You've earned this," Eleanor told me when extending the offer. "Not just through recent events, but through 15 years of putting clients first." As news of my appointment spread, a reporter asked during a brief press conference, "Do you consider yourself a hero in this situation, Mr. Ellis?" The question made me uncomfortable. "There are no heroes in this story," I replied honestly. "Just people making choices about what they value most. I chose to value trust and integrity over expediency. That shouldn't be heroic, it should be standard practice." Part 4, The Reconstruction. 1 year later, I stood at the podium during Meridian's annual client appreciation event, looking out over the gathered faces. Some were familiar, long-time clients who had remained loyal through the turbulence. Others were new, drawn to our rebuilt firm precisely because of how we had handled the crisis. "Trust," I began, "is perhaps the most valuable currency in finance, yet paradoxically, the one we often guard least carefully. At Meridian, we learned this lesson the hard way." The room was silent, everyone conscious of the journey we had undertaken. Today marks not just the anniversary of our reorganization, but the formal launch of what we're calling the Meridian Trust Initiative, a comprehensive approach to financial services that places transparency and client interests at the center of everything we do. The initiative had been months in development, a systematic rebuild of how we engaged with clients, structured compensation, and measured success. No more hidden fees. No proprietary products pushed to boost firm profits. Advisor bonuses tied directly to client satisfaction and long-term outcomes rather than transaction volume. This isn't just a marketing program, I continued. It's a fundamental shift in how we operate. And while I wish we had arrived here through less painful means, I'm proud of what we've built from the ashes of last year's crisis. After the presentation, Kayla found me by the refreshment table. Now serving as our Chief Analytics Officer, she had been instrumental in redesigning our performance metrics. Not bad for a guy who was escorted out by security a year ago, she smiled, handing me a sparkling water. Sometimes getting pushed out the door is exactly what you need to find the right path back in. Philosophical as always, she laughed. But seriously, Nathan, what you did took incredible courage. Most people would have just updated their resume and moved on. I shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I just couldn't live with the alternative. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Marcus arrived to meet me for dinner. He whistled, looking around the elegantly appointed space. Quite a comeback story. Meridian's reputation is actually stronger now than before the scandal. The financial press is calling you the firm that reinvented itself. We had good bones to build on, I acknowledged. Most of the team was always doing right by clients. We just needed to make that the explicit priority rather than an assumed value. Over dinner, Marcus shared industry gossip. Richard had eventually pleaded guilty to securities fraud charges, receiving a suspended sentence and substantial fines. Carlton Partners had abandoned their financial services acquisition strategy after the negative publicity, refocusing on technology companies. You know what's ironic? Marcus mused. If Richard had approached the Carlton deal transparently and ethically from the beginning, it might actually have been beneficial for everyone. Their technology platform coupled with your client relationship approach could have been powerful. That's often how these things go, I agreed. Deception rarely leads to better outcomes than honesty, even when the honest path seems harder initially. As we finished our meal, Marcus grew more serious. I never asked you directly, during those days when you were locked out and everything was falling apart, did you ever regret blowing the whistle? There must have been moments of doubt. I considered the question carefully. Yes, there were moments. When I couldn't sleep, wondering if I'd destroyed my career for nothing. When former colleagues stopped returning my calls. When the legal bills mounted. I paused, swirling the last of my wine. But regret? No. Because the alternative was becoming someone who would look the other way, and that's a more costly transformation than any career setback. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. A price of trust paid in both directions, the cost of betraying it, and the cost of upholding it. That's actually perfect, I smiled. The price of trust. We just chose different currencies for payment. Walking home later through Chicago's glittering downtown, I reflected on the journey of the past year. The reconstructed Meridian was smaller than before, we'd lost about 20% of our client base during the turmoil, but more purposeful. Every decision, from hiring to investment strategy, now passed through the filter of a simple question: does this honor the trust our clients place in us? My phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. Board approved the ethics training budget unanimously. Full steam ahead. Another small victory in the ongoing work of rebuilding. Not just structures and systems, but something more fundamental, a culture where doing the right thing wasn't exceptional, but expected. As I reached my apartment building, my thoughts turned to Richard. Despite everything, I still felt a certain sadness about his fate. A brilliant mind and charismatic leader who had gradually lost sight of the principles that should anchor our profession. His $5 million consulting fee had instead become millions in legal expenses and fines, his reputation permanently tarnished. The doorman greeted me with his usual cheerfulness. "Evening, Mr. Ellis. Package came for you today." The unmarked envelope contained a single sheet of paper, a handwritten note from Richard, postmarked from Florida where he'd reportedly relocated. Nathan, I've had a year to reflect on what happened. While I still believe you chose the nuclear option when diplomacy might have sufficed, I've come to recognize the fundamental truth in your position. The trust our clients place in us is sacred, and I lost sight of that amidst balance sheets and growth projections. You paid a price for your principles, as did I for abandoning mine. Perhaps we both learned something valuable, though through different means. Best regards in your continued work. RH. I folded the note carefully and placed it in my desk drawer, an unexpected coda to a chapter I'd considered closed. The next morning, as I prepared for a meeting with a new client, a multi-generational family business seeking guidance on succession planning, I realized something had fundamentally shifted within me. The crisis had clarified not just how I viewed my professional responsibilities, but how I understood trust itself. Trust wasn't merely a business asset to be protected, but a mutual investment between people, fragile, valuable, and requiring constant care. The price of maintaining it might sometimes seem high, but the cost of betraying it was invariably higher. As I gathered my materials for the meeting, I smiled at the simple plaque now sitting on my desk, a gift from the team during our rebirth celebration. It read simply, "Integrity is not negotiable. The price of trust. Sometimes painful to pay, but always worth the investment." The end.